Hey everyone, it's Samuel. And welcome to Plot Hooks, the podcast where we explore the arts of narrative and collaborative storytelling in the world's premier RPG, Dungeons & Dragons. Today in the Prime Material, creating iconic NPCs. In the wilds, the Blue Dragon. And in the Tavern, what would you do if the party became iconic? Well, hello there, everyone. I hope everybody out there is having an excellent day. We've got an exciting topic for you this morning, afternoon, or night, whenever you happen to be listening to this episode. We're going to be looking at making iconic non-player characters for our campaigns. Before we get into that, though, just some announcements to get out of the way. Remember to follow us on social media. Our next stage of the Quest for 1K is currently going on Twitter. We're only 64 followers away from triggering our next giveaway. For those of you waiting on Plot Hooks Adventures, the show will resume in January. We had some technical difficulties which kiboshed a recording session, which we are going to pick back up and hopefully finish the recording here in the next couple of weeks. So the episodes of the next session, which will actually be the season finale, should start airing sometime in January. After that, Plot Hooks Adventures goes on a scheduled hiatus while we record the next season, which will bring to a head this story of Carrick that we've been telling. And let me tell you, you get some hints just in this upcoming Session 5. It's going to be really cool to listen to. We appreciate each and every one of you out there who supports the show, whether it's just by listening and clicking download or by rating and reviewing the podcast. Those are genuinely appreciated things, and it means so much. We also appreciate it if you support us directly financially to help us keep the lights on here and support the work that we do here to produce content for everyone. You can support us directly on Patreon at patreon.com/plothooks, where you can find lots of awesome perks and supplements. And you can also purchase our content on the DMs Guild, currently working on the second supplement that we're releasing there, Disaster Hamsters. Currently already live is Oath of Destiny, a paladin subclass, which you can find on the DMs Guild. Check it out, and we genuinely appreciate you supporting the show. But, with those announcements out of the way, let's dive into the prime material. Making iconic NPCs. Every DM has been there. Your party is eating dinner at a tavern, enjoying their mutton and ale, talking about the day's adventure, smelling the smoke of the fireplace and listening to the laughter and jovial environment and the minstrel off in the corner playing for tips in a hat. And suddenly you describe how the door bursts open and a character walks right in and confronts the party. And you tell your players that they recognize this character as insert epic character name here. And your players just look at you confused. Two of them start looking at their notes. One of your players says, "Who?" And another one says, "Oh yeah, that's the person we met in such and such a place." But they're completely wrong. These moments are deflating as a DM. You tried to build up a character in the past, and you tried to bring them back in an impactful moment to create a great story. But clearly the character was not memorable enough. All the work that you did behind the scenes, the impact you wanted to show in the moment, it all completely went away as you had to explain to the party who this person was. You might as well have just told them that a nondescript Sir Dave walked in and talked to them. And we all want to prevent Sir Dave moments, both as PCs and DMs, because those take away from the intended epicness of a story. So we go out of our way to make a character memorable. And there are great resources out there for making memorable NPCs. That's something we all want, and there's a lot of great content out there giving tips about making NPCs that are very memorable. And that really helps prevent those, as I called them, Sir Dave moments. But today, I want to go beyond memorable. I want to go into the iconic. How do we make characters in our games that are iconic, not just memorable, but so well known and recognized that they transcend from being just another character that's cool and memorable to being an epic character that is forever connected to that story, that setting, connected forever to that group of friends who enjoyed that play experience together? Think about the difference. We can watch a movie, a good movie, and see characters that are extremely well done. And we can then recognize them when we see them again. Those characters are memorable. But then you have characters which are iconic, where anyone, even if they haven't even seen a particular movie, can instantly recognize the character for who they are because they're so ubiquitous. There's nothing like them. E.T., Harry Potter, The Terminator, Pennywise the Clown, Joker. These are iconic characters. And this is what we want to discuss today. How do we create those? How do we create iconic characters in our games? Characters that are not just memorable as we tell our collaborative stories together, but are so memorable that they become icons. Incredibly widely known and recognized within our playgroup, so that they almost become archetypes, characters against which other characters like them are compared. So we're going to go today over 3 concepts which I think are essential for creating a character which is iconic in our TTRPG games. First, iconic characters have to have an iconic trait. Think about those movie characters I mentioned. Harry Potter has his glasses and his lightning bolt scar. E.T. has his glowing finger and voice and that really unique alien look. Terminator has his leather jacket and sunglasses mixed with his iconic lines and the Arnold Schwarzenegger vocals which voice them. Pennywise has that iconic clown makeup and hair. The Joker has his makeup and especially his laugh. There's others. Batman with his look, with the classic cowl, and things like the bat signal in the sky and batarangs. Each of these characters have something about them which is unique, which sets them apart from all others, but not just in a memorable way, in an iconic way. They have a trait that is ubiquitous to the character. No other character has it, and if another character does, it's thought of as a callback to the original. How many movies have riffed on Arnold's iconic cadence when he says, "I'll be back"? Everyone thinks of Terminator. That's because Terminator is an iconic character. When you see someone wearing that strange double-brimmed hat, everybody immediately thinks of Sherlock Holmes. But perhaps the greatest example of this, and a character who I think, in my personal opinion, is the most iconic character of all time, is Darth Vader and his breath. His breathing is so iconic. It's, in my opinion, the greatest iconic trait of all time. Star Wars movies and video games alike have begun to capitalize on the suspense by just teasing his presence with just his breath. You have moments all over the place where you hear him before you actually see him, and everyone instantly knows what that is. It's so iconic. And it's these type of things that we're talking about when we're talking about creating iconic characters. They have to have an iconic trait like this. It's got to be something which stands out obviously from all other characters that you've done before with that group. And it's got to be a trait that is used or referenced constantly so that it becomes completely intertwined with the NPC's identity, making them instantly recognizable if you mention this trait. So what kind of traits work for this? One of them is, of course, having a really unique look. In movies, of course, a character's unique look is often a very memorable and iconic thing about them, like Batman or the Joker. I will say that just describing simply the visual is a little harder in our medium unless you're quite comfortable with descriptions and painting a picture in your players' minds. Because even a unique trait like a massive scar or a full body tattoo or unique garb or other visual things like that which really stand out can be forgotten as the PCs interact with this particular non-player character, because as they're talking with them, it just doesn't come up. Whenever Luke Skywalker is talking to Darth Vader, his breathing is always there. That little machine is always working, keeping him alive. You can't forget about it. Even if you were just listening to it, it's still there. So there's a couple of other ways that you can create iconic traits that aren't just visual, and auditory is one of those ways, just like with Darth Vader's breath. And the second would be really playing into something that the character has. If it's something that's auditory, then again, it should be unique, just like we mentioned already. This particular method of doing an iconic trait provides you with not only the option of describing, but also performing that unique trait. Maybe they always have a wheeze. Maybe it's a unique voice. Maybe they wear a heavy chain and it clinks all the time as they move. Maybe it's some word that they say over and over again. This iconic trait could also be something they have. And again, it needs to be something totally unique to them. I don't think it just works to just say, oh, this axe is black. No, I think it needs to be a completely, totally unique weapon. Either a weapon of your own creation or just something totally out of left field, or something that is so obviously not normal, like a blade dripping with lava or something like that, which just creates this impactful moment where they just have this totally unique weapon. And with a weapon like that, you have different cues which really can play into constantly describing it. Something like a blade that drips lava. You can describe the heat that comes off of it. You can describe the sound of the sizzling as these things hit the floor, dripping around it. They could also have something like a totally unique familiar. You could be talking about a gnome who rides around on a spectral polar bear. Finding something that they have can be a good option. But whatever it is, whether it's their unique look or something that they have or something auditory about them, iconic characters always have an iconic trait. And as you are playing the campaign, whatever this thing is that they have, it needs to be referenced constantly. Always describe how they have it, how they use it, how they twirl their weapon while they eat, if that's the case, how they interact with that familiar or whatever it is, how this sound keeps happening, perform it if you want to. Keep the trait in the mind of the players. Obviously, don't mention it every other sentence, but just make sure that it's always first and foremost in the mind of the players so that it will ingrain that trait to the character. And eventually you'll reach the point where that trait is so connected to the character that all you have to do is describe that weapon they see in the distance, or describe the breathing you hear, or describe the familiar or whatever, and your party will instantly know who it is. So that's the first concept that we wanted to go over. The second is that iconic characters have to do something iconic. You can give them a very unique look, a unique iconic trait like we've just discussed, but they will never become iconic if they don't do something iconic. Iconic characters can't just always be in the background of a story. A random tavern keeper they encounter can be memorable. You can create some unique looks or unique traits about them. You can build up that character as much as you want, but it's rare that those kind of characters would become iconic because unless you work it in, they don't do much in the narrative. They won't interact much with the party, and they won't further the story generally. And all of these are things which an iconic character would do. If Darth Vader did not have any role in Star Wars past just being a guard for the Emperor, he wouldn't be nearly as iconic. He's iconic because he's at the center of a tragic story of failure who ultimately gets redeemed. He's iconic because he kills Obi-Wan. He's iconic because, in one of the biggest twists in cinema history, he is the main character's father. Iconic characters have to be active in a story. Not every character can be iconic. Don't spend time trying to make each character that level of impactful, because we can't. We have to spend our time building up a main iconic character into the story. That could be somebody like a mage who helps the party all the time, becoming a resource and a source of information for them, maybe even accompanying them on a mission. It could be a prominent official in a corrupt government who is trying to aid the party in their efforts to overthrow the evil dictator, and that's who interacts with the party. Now, an iconic character doesn't have to be central to the story necessarily. I don't think they always have to be a force that's driving the story, driving that narrative, but they have to be there in the midst. And while they're there, while they're interacting with the party, give them a defining moment in the narrative. Let them do something that's iconic. A moment when they tell the party to keep going as they hold off the zombie assault to let the party escape. The moment when they burst into a room, panting, revealing key information that changes the course of the plot. The moment where a party walks up on them and sees them kill a beast single-handedly in combat when the party thought they were going to have to help. A moment whenever this character does something so amazing, it's iconic. And that moment becomes etched into your party's memory, and it becomes part of this iconic character. Darth Vader's "No, I am your father" moment. In the comics, the Joker killing the second Robin. Gandalf's "You shall not pass" moment with the Balrog. King Kong climbing to the top of the Empire State Building. All of these are ubiquitous moments when we think of those particular characters. And it's something that fits their characters too. It's not something that's outside of it. It's not that you just squeeze something in where a pacifist mage character kills a beast and that's your impactful moment. No, that doesn't fit that character. But if you have something that really fits a character and you really want to make them iconic, give them an iconic moment. You want to create a moment that is immediately thought of when you think of a particular character. Think a year down the line after the campaign's already over and you're talking with your group about a certain character. You want this moment to be one of the first things that pops into everyone's head whenever you talk about this old character. And whenever that happens, whenever your mind automatically goes to a certain moment, you know you've got that second concept, that this iconic character has done something iconic. So, iconic characters have an iconic trait. Iconic characters need to have an iconic moment. And thirdly and finally, becoming iconic takes time. We would love to rush this process as a DM, and sometimes we do. And no, I do, especially because my group doesn't meet as often as some, and so you want to rush the story along sometimes. But whenever you haven't taken the time for a character to build a rapport with a party, for these characters to actually interact with the PCs, there's just not enough time that's passed. It takes time for that mystique to build up. It's rare that out of a gate a character is iconic. Sometimes they are. Sometimes you get a character like Victor in Critical Role, who's just a random shopkeep, who is only really interacted with 4 times throughout the entire 115 episodes of the first campaign of Critical Role, and yet he's so beloved because Matthew Mercer's performance of him is so hilarious. But generally, this doesn't happen after one session. An iconic character happens over time. So we shouldn't try to force it. We shouldn't try to do all the work all at once. We can introduce a character. We can even give them that iconic moment and those iconic traits right at the beginning. But it's going to take a bit for the PCs to really interact with them, get to know them, and see them as iconic characters. It doesn't matter how we view them as DMs, if the players don't view them that way, then they're not iconic. They could be iconic to us in our own headcanon because we know so much more about their background or what have you that the players haven't found out yet, but if the players don't get a chance to interact with them, well, they never find anything about that out, and so they're not iconic to them. It takes time to do that. It takes intentionality as DMs, especially, as I mentioned before, if you're not meeting as often. If you meet once a month versus just once a week, this takes a lot of time because there's a lot of time in between episodes for facts and traits and moments to just naturally get lost in memory. We can't be frustrated with our players if they're not seeing a character that we created to be iconic as they want us to do it. If they're not getting it, then they need more time with that character. Either that or the character just doesn't jive well with the party at all, which, of course, is a different problem. And there's, of course, a lot more that we can talk about with this, but if we do these 3 concepts, realizing that becoming iconic takes time, making sure that this iconic character has an iconic trait, and letting this iconic character do something iconic, then I think we'll be well on our way to creating more of those characters that are just really impactful and are things that we still remember for years to come. So what are your favorite iconic characters that your DM has used, or that you've used as a DM? What are some other tips or tidbits that you've learned? Hit us up on social media. We'd love to hear from you. But I think for now, that's about all the time we have in the Prime material. Let's head out to the wilds and look at one of the most iconic creatures in D&D. Right, we're out here in the wilderness, and today we're looking at the Blue Dragon. I was thinking about, we're talking about iconic things. We should look at an iconic monster. And what monster is more iconic than the one that's in the name, dragons? And we're going to look at my favorite chromatic dragon, the Blue Dragon. In general, chromatic dragons are the evil dragons. They're generally followers of Tiamat, the queen of evil dragons, who lives on Avernus, the first layer of the 9 hells. Tiamat's actually got 5 heads, 1 of each of the chromatic colors, black, blue, green, red, and white. And her greed, egotistical nature is shared by her chromatic worshippers. They're tyrants, hoarders, care nothing for others, just care about themselves, gaining treasure because they think it belongs to them, and they believe that it's their right to rule everything. blue dragons specifically are generally found around deserts, although they can also be found, according to the Monster Manual, at searing badlands, rocky coasts, or dry steppes. But generally speaking, you're thinking about deserts here. They're gorgeous creatures with frilled ears and a massive rhino horn on top of their nose, rows of spikes across their face and down their back, with scales that vary from a really dark blue, almost indigo color, to a light azure. And as a blue dragon ages, you really start to get a hint of what their breath weapon is, because the air around them starts to hum and crackle with static. And whenever the dragon is upset or about to attack, you can smell ozone burning in the air, a smell almost like dustiness, because their breath weapon is a lightning breath. So what about them is different than just any other dragon? It's honestly a little easy to drop a dragon into a story. You just want a really cool fight. You want a really big bad who's destroyed a town. You want a evil creature of some description at a really powerful CR. Just throw a dragon in there. But what about them is unique? Well, there's a few things. One is that desert thing that we mentioned. They're a big threat to caravans going through deserts, to people living there in oases or nomadic tribes. And perhaps that's an interesting plot hook you could use, where maybe there's a desert in your setting and all of a sudden transports to and from either side are just not getting through, and certain supplies are not getting to where they need to go, and the players have to investigate why. They also have a really unique method of hunting in the desert, where it actually buries itself in the sand with just that massive rhino horn sticking up, so it looks just like a rock, and they just wait until the prey gets close, and the dragon just rises up and attacks. Another great thing about them is that they will actually have servants a little bit more so than some other chromatic dragons. The Monster Manual talks about how if they have talented creatures serving them, that actually, quote, reinforces their sense of superiority, end quote. So they will recruit very powerful entities and reward them for their efforts. I also love blue dragon layers. They're my favorite layers of all dragons because they actually use their lightning breath to crystallize the sand. We've heard of lightning strikes turning sand into glass. Well, what they do is underneath the sands of their desert, they carve out these crystal caverns with their lightning breath. That, plus the idea that they really love gems and not just gold, really just creates a visually interesting place where the party is underground in this crystal cavern filled with all sorts of different colors of gems, and they turn on a light and just all sorts of light is bouncing off of each other and reflecting. Really a visually stunning setting. But it's also a brutal layer. They're crafty. And the blue dragon does all sorts of stuff to try to keep its lair secret and safe. A lot of times sinkholes appear around their lair, and they'll actually put just not very valuable stuff on top of the sinkhole area so that somebody goes walking out on this really thin layer of sand crust and they just fall down into a massive sand pit. They'll also be perfectly willing to just collapse part of their lair and trap someone in there. So all in all, they're really interesting creatures. Again, they're my favorite, from just their color to their lightning breath to, we didn't even mention the fact that around their lair there's thunderstorms all the time. to their actual crystal layer itself, they're absolutely awesome. There's 4 different varieties, as there are with all of the chromatic dragons. There's the blue dragon wormling, the young blue dragon, the adult blue dragon, and the ancient blue dragon, found in the monster manual. They range in CRs from 3 to 9 to 16 to 23. So they're the second most powerful chromatic dragon by CR next to the red. As far as their actual stat block is concerned, there's not a ton different than other chromatic dragons. Obviously the breath weapon is different, but generally speaking it just is about the same. They do notably have a burrow speed, which you can use to some good effect if you're fighting underground in their crystal lair. But generally what sets them apart is just the unique elements of their lore and how that affects how we can use them in stories. But I think that's about enough of this iconic creature. We'll of course return to dragons at a later date. For now, let's head over to the tavern and get some refreshment. Alright, we're out here in the tavern. Today's plot hook: what would you do if the party became iconic? Now this is something that all DMs face naturally as the party progresses through the game. In fact, the tiers of play are even named off of this. Tier 1 of levels 1 through 4 is termed local heroes. Levels 5 through 10 is heroes of the realm. Tier 3 of 11 through 16 is Masters of the Realm, and Tier 4 of levels 17 through 20 is termed Masters of the World. The further you go on in a campaign, the more powerful you get, and the more renown you generally get, and you inevitably come to the attention of powerful figures. You're eventually recognized in the street by common folk because of the deeds that you've done. It's just par for the course as a campaign progresses. But what if you became iconic early? Like in that Tier 1 level? Sometimes that's a case for individuals in a party. Sometimes you come into a party at the beginning of a campaign as a well-known person, or there might even be multiple well-known people in a party. There's even the background folk hero, but it's rare for a party itself to be well-known over a large area early in their campaign. So what kind of stories could we tell if we bucked that trend? The first thing that comes to mind is a story of a rival group, where perhaps your party came to some high level of renown and pushed out maybe a already established group. And now there's rivalry there, there's tension, and maybe that actually plays into maybe some of the things that are going on in the campaign, and these rivals become bitter enemies, and over time this just escalates into a full-on conflict. Maybe it's a way of really setting up the party and setting up a story when you know something apocalyptic is coming down the line. You know, setting up that, the party is really highly favored in this kingdom when you know that a dragon attack is about to come in. And now the party is going to have to work together to tell a story of these heroes who were held in such high regard, who were seen as so powerful in this realm. Now they have to deal with the fact that they failed, that they couldn't stop this event from happening. Now they have to go around and try to figure out a way that they could be successful and ultimately defeat this threat and regain their honor. Another way to use this would be, it's a great way of pulling in another plot hook where they reach a high standing in a particular region and you're trying to build in a plot hook to get them to go to another locale. And Perhaps the thing that does it is, now that they're in such high standing of this one kingdom, that the neighboring kingdom sends word to their king to say, hey, send us those people, we're having such and such a problem. And it helps move the campaign along in that regard. We're generally a little afraid of doing this as DMs, of giving them too much status too early, because we don't want to really affect the balance of the game. It's kind of the same ideas behind not wanting to give them too much money or too many magical items up front. We don't want to upset the economic or combat balance, and we don't want to upset the power balance by giving them too much power too early either. But there's lots of ways to rein it in if it doesn't work out. So if it really plays well with a story, go ahead and let your party become pretty iconic early on. Might be able to tell some great stories with it. But I think for now, it's about time we wrapped up this week's episode of Plot Hooks. Thank you all very much for listening. Be sure to check out our Patreon and check out our content on the DMs Guild. Remember to follow us on all our social media. And thanks again for listening from all of us here at Plot Hooks. I'm Samuel. Thanks from Becca, Matt, Mike, Steve, Dave, Zach, and of course, Podcast Pupper Ellie. We'll see you all again next week for another episode of Plot Hooks.